Welcome to our NECR Alumni Career Deep Dive. My name is Sherston Pugh, and I am one of the Associate Directors of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program at Columbia's School of Professional Studies, as well as a proud alumni of the program. On behalf of NECR, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We began this deep dive series to provide NECR and SPS students with a glimpse into the careers of conflict resolution practitioners who are making impacts in and helping to define the conflict resolution field. This series originated with my interest in knowing on a very granular level what people do, how they got there, and what it looks like. Today's session will be recorded and available on the NECR events page next week. We are really pleased and thrilled to have Cody Smith, who will present an overview of his career. And we encourage all participants to submit questions to the QA box, and we'll address all of those, or as many as we can, towards the end. But feel free to type in your questions at any time. And also, if you're interested in finding out more about the NECR program, please visit our website and feel free to contact negotiation@sps.columbia.edu. I'll also post that for you later. But again, thank you for being here today. And also thank you to Cody Smith. I will let Cody take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sherston, for that introduction. My name is Cody Smith. I'm also an alumnus of the program. I graduated in 2014, and I attended full-time on campus from 2012 to 2014, in case that's interesting, because I know they've changed the program up a little bit. But since last year, I've also been an associate member on the faculty, where I teach in the negotiation class, as well as the resolution strategies course for the Capstone. In addition to that, I also have a company, the CNCM, which is a strategic negotiation advisory company. I also run some workshops and support facilitation and mediation in conflict. So how did I come to Colombia? So I came to Colombia through sort of a interesting route. I grew up in rural Nebraska, and this is not a place where there's a lot of conflict, but it's also, I wanted to go abroad. I wanted to get out of my small village of 300 people, and I went to Germany as a Rotary exchange student. And on my first day of school there, in my junior year, I came home late. I didn't know how the bus system worked. I didn't know German. And so I came home late, and when I arrived at the house, my host mother was irate. She screamed at me in German. I couldn't understand a word she was saying, and it was just a disaster. But this actually became my first experience with a mediator. My counselor from Rotary came to the house. He was in his private practice, he was a mediator professionally, and he decided to help mediate the conflict between myself and my host mother. And through this process, I was able to explain why I was not able to get home on time, all these things that she wasn't understanding because I couldn't convey it properly in English. I was also probably a little upset, wasn't able to control my emotions as well. She certainly wasn't able to either. And so it was something where a mediator was definitely appreciated. And ultimately, this allowed us to repair the relationship and actually develop a better one, which allowed me to have one of the most transformative experiences of my life. It became one of the first areas where I started to get interested in international relations. So I went to college after that, and I studied international studies at the University of Nebraska. And what happened was that sort of developed over time. I went in as a pre-med student, as a chemistry major, but ultimately after taking all these courses in mediation and working with a mediation center, And after studying abroad 2 more times in college, I found out that medicine really wasn't for me. And what I loved was conflict resolution and international relations. So I decided I wanted to be a diplomat by the end of my time in college. I started looking into what is that? What do I need to know? What do I need to do with my skill set in order to become a diplomat? And so I found out that they value foreign policy knowledge and negotiation skills. And so I realized I didn't have these 2 areas built up yet. And so I thought, okay, I need to further my education. And I applied to 2 programs. Heidelberg University's Center for American Studies, they have a Master of Arts program in Germany. And in that one, I could focus on developing the foreign policy side, the culture, the history, the constitutional law, all of that. I was able to, that program would provide those skills, but not negotiation. So I also applied at the same time to Colombia's negotiation and conflict resolution program. I came across both of these programs through talking with my faculty members at the professors who I became close with at the university, and they both really helped direct me toward these 2 programs. So that's how I actually found it. So I didn't actually get accepted into Colombia right away. My application, I think something happened where there was a glitch in how I sent it, but they essentially said, Colombia essentially said they'd consider me in the next semester's round. I think it was like some technical error when maybe too many people were submitting at the same time. I don't know. I can't recall. But so I was accepted into Heidelberg, and so I enrolled there in October 2011, and I majored in U.S. history, foreign policy, and constitutional law. So I'm in Germany, and I'm already living there, and I received an acceptance letter from Colombia less than a month later. So I'm now facing a predicament. Do I leave Heidelberg and go to New York, go to Colombia, or do I try and postpone my studies at Colombia, or have to apply again in the future, finish up my program in Heidelberg, and just roll the dice and try and get accepted again? And so what I ended up doing was trying to split the difference. I tried to enroll in both programs at the same time. I worked with Heidelberg and Columbia, and Heidelberg allowed me to complete my thesis and my coursework and my term papers, all while I would study at Columbia. And Columbia allowed me to defer for 1 semester, just long enough to complete my exams at Heidelberg, and as well as some of my courses. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I moved to New York after a year in Heidelberg, Germany. And like I said before, I attended it on campus full time for those 2 years. It was an amazing opportunity. I was able to take courses from within the program, as well as attend all these lectures with renowned professors in the field. And I also was able to cross-register into courses at Columbia Business School, which helped me develop the consulting skills that I would later apply in my career. And so I ultimately graduated from both programs about a month apart in April and May of 2014. So during my final semester at Columbia, I started to develop a thesis. It took me a while to come up with something because I was starting to look at, do I still want to be a diplomat, or do I want to go into business? And so I tried to position my thesis in a way that I could use it to apply to either program or either type of career path. And so I I came up with a topic which was a pretty significant conflict at the time. There was a transatlantic trade negotiation happening between the United States and the European Union, two of the largest markets in the world. But at the time, there was a side conflict that was actually coming into play, which was the United States. It became known that the United States had been spying on our European allies. And so this actually became a major roadblock in the trade negotiations. And so that's what I ended up doing my thesis on. I also took the Foreign Service exam right after this, and I did pretty well, but I didn't make it through the whole process. It turns out that that's a very if there's anybody who's interested in that process, I recommend applying regularly. It takes most people 2 to 3 tries to get in. But I also, during that last semester, I started interviewing with companies, and I found out that the program, for me at least, it was fairly, I found it very useful to apply to investment banks, to consulting firms, I interviewed as well with a domestic conflict resolution NGO, a US Senate campaign, and Harvard Business School. And those last 2 are the ones that I ultimately ended up going with. After a stint on the campaign, I ended up leaving it and taking a job at Harvard Business School. Now, in the actual admissions process to Harvard Business School, or in the application process, I actually had to submit a writing sample. And so that was something where I was able to use that thesis directly in order to get a job. I took a chapter from the thesis, and it ended up serving me very well. I also was applying to work with one of the leading negotiation experts in the field, Professor Deepak Malhotra, and he's based in the Negotiations, Organizations, and Markets unit, which is NOM there. It's primarily filled with economists and social psychologists who all teach negotiation. It's an academic department there. And so but Deepak, his main focus at that time, at least with respect to what I was working on, is he was working on peace process design. So how do you actually design peace negotiations and advise on peace negotiations in order to make them more successful, more likely to reach a sustainable outcome, a sustainable peace agreement? And in addition to that, I also helped support his advisory work with governments that negotiate with armed groups. Most of the time I spent in this role, which was, as I mentioned above, from 2014 to 2018, for this stage of my career, I was writing cases. I wrote HBS cases, these specific type of publication, on the peace negotiations in Colombia, in El Salvador, and in the Philippines, each of which were dealing with some form of insurgency. And our Colombia case, actually, we were able to interview the leaders of the government, who were from the president to his entire negotiating team. And for this, President Santos actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. So in that experience, he also came to Harvard in order to receive a Great Negotiator Award. And the case that we had written for that award ceremony, was used for the award ceremony. And that experience allowed me to also meet with several of these other people who were working on that conflict, including William Ury, who's the founder of Harvard's program on negotiation and a renowned mediator. And subsequently to that, I started volunteering a little bit with them. I supported a project related to North Korea's nuclear talks with the United States. And following Harvard, in 2018, I decided to leave Harvard and move to Colorado and try and start out my own consulting firm. So initially, I was wanting to take my time with this. I didn't want to just jump into it. So I started mediating in Colorado's courts with the Denver Bar Association in Denver. And I started building up the company and strategizing how I would start to roll out this different services. And I networked with local business groups like Rotary in Fort Collins. But then in 2019, I also started, I got a call from Deepak and I decided, okay, I can help him with this new course that he's launching, which was a course on war and peace. So together we wrote some more HBS cases on the main projects I was leading on was a case on all of the conflicts in the Middle East since I think the 7th century, as well as World War II. And right after that, as I started to really return almost full focus to my company, and I subcontracted with William Urie's team at the Experimental Negotiation Initiative and 3S, two of the organizations he works with. My role on his team was as a mid-level strategist. He works with track 1 peace negotiations and other types of negotiations between governments. And if anybody's interested in what track 1 is, that's typically dealing with the most senior levels of government, presidents, foreign ministers, anybody who holds the portfolio for a specific issue and is delegated the authority to negotiate with that issue. That's typically the type of people we'd be working with. My main portfolio for our work was climate and the electoral conflict, and I supported on several other projects as well that the team was dealing with. Including one of those projects that was fairly interesting was outside of government work, and that was between a ventilator company and a major Latin American hospital system, helping support negotiations between them on a possible transfer of those ventilators to the system. And from 2020 to present, I've been teaching in the program as I mentioned before. So skip ahead here. A few of the other cases that might be interesting to some people is that what I've found has been very useful as my main focus has been negotiation as opposed to mediation. I've found that there's a lot of demand, particularly for people who want support in their negotiations, who want a sounding board, who want somebody to help them work through strategy and provide suggestions on how they can approach an upcoming negotiation. And this is true both in the business and the public policy side. Right now, over the last year or so, I've been advising the CFO of a privately held automotive company. It has over $1 billion in annual revenue. And I've been helping him with his salary negotiations with his company. Right now, I'm also prepping the owner of a healthcare system with his negotiations that are most likely dealing with a merger and acquisition case. And something that I've found is that I'm constantly returning to and applying the lessons that I learned throughout the NECR program, from mapping a conflict to building a strategy to emphasizing or empathizing with others to executing the strategy that I'd worked out. and dealing with how can I be nimble. You don't want to be too rigid with your strategy. You have to allow for some flexibility with how you approach things once things change live in the process. And finally, to learning how to actually learn from those experiences so that you can constantly be bettering yourself as a negotiator, as an advisor, and as a human being, because I'm always applying these skills not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life, in dealing with my landlord and dealing with strangers on the street. So thank you, Kirsten. If you have any questions, I'd love to switch it over.
No, wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a really great overview, and you covered a lot of ground. So thank you so much. And I do have some questions, but I also want to remind our audience, thank you again for joining us. And if you have any questions for Cody, please don't be shy. Feel free to put them in the QA, especially if you want to hear maybe some more details about something he's brought up. But I'm happy to kick it off right now, and kind of rewinding a bit back to when you were at Columbia University. And you mentioned something that I feel is a really common kind of question that students have, that you were mentioning how you attended a lot of lectures and really took advantage of all of the or many opportunities that Columbia provides. And I think that's sometimes a challenge to navigate because it's such a massive university. On any given day, there can be several really excellent and very, very worthwhile events. So I was wondering if you had a strategy or how you were able to find out, the kind of relevant information and suss it out and make those choices. Because I think that is something that when people are faced with it, is a little overwhelming sometimes.
Absolutely. It's at any large university, especially Columbia, which has all of these resources, as you mentioned, from the World Leaders Forum events, which I found personally amazing. And that, for example, you can sign up for their newsletter just to make sure you're on all of their events lists. And so that's one of the systems that I would use. Is I would just, anytime I found out something that like any type of regular event, I would sign up for their list and just keep track of those things. The other ways is just, you're going to be coming in to this program with an amazing cohort and of really smart, very engaged people who you can share information with live every day and say, okay, what kind of, oh, you're going to this? Why don't we go together? And so that became really common. And we even did that for things outside of Columbia. We would go to the Daily Show and watch Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, and we'd do all sorts of things like that. And I'd run into people from other schools, and all of this has been, it's just one of the things is that you have to be engaged. You have to take it on a little bit yourself, and as well as the program will share, like Kirsten here, will share a lot of information with you. And I highly recommend you read her emails.
Thank you so much. I wasn't looking for that plug, but I'll take it. Yes, we do. The program does share a lot of information that we find that comes our way, but at the same time, there's always so much. So thank you for sharing that. And then another, we do have a question I see in the QA. I'm going to ask one more before I get to that, because a lot of our alumni and also just people in the field, do either work full-time as consultants or start their own consulting company or firm. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about, once you've made the decision to move forward with this plan for yourself, how do you think about, or what are some of the action steps that you take in developing a network and spreading the word about the work you're doing, especially if you're sort of starting off as a brand new consultant?
Yeah, so it's challenging. It's definitely something where you don't want to go in with rose-colored glasses too much, because it's it's just a general thing with starting a company, I would say, is that especially entrepreneurs are typically optimists, and we need to temper that a little bit with the real challenges so that we plan for it. And so that's what I tried to do. Is I spoke with I was lucky, I was at a business school when I decided to make this shift, and I had access to quite a few experts on business. And so they helped me plan a bit around this. And I looked at what other companies in the space do. And I started to plan this before I actually moved into it. I also I understood that it would take quite a long time to reach profitability in order to build a customer base and to actually start to do some of these things that I was wanting to do as a consultant. So what I ended up doing was I was able to use my savings in order to invest that into the beginning of the company and take my time, develop the skills that I needed to figure out how to actually open a company and have it legally established. All of this stuff that that you don't think about when you're like, oh, I want to start a company. Well, actually starting a company has a few steps in between. It's not that difficult, but it takes a little bit of work. And so what I did for networking was that actually became one of the most important things. Mediation is a rapidly growing field. I first thought, okay, I could provide some mediation services to businesses. There were quite a few businesses in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is where I decided to move to, but there weren't many mediators. Well, I discovered that there might be a reason for that. there was a lot of free mediation services in the area. And so, yeah. And so paying attention to the market, doing that was important, but also I was able to rely on some of those other areas which are actually my strong suits, which is negotiation advising and teaching. I was able to go and run some of these workshops. I went to Haiti. I ran some of these workshops in Colorado. And so that can be a good way to both gain experience as well as build another basis of clientele. So some people run free workshops even, and that can serve as once somebody sees what kind of advice you can give, then they might come and ask for more. And also something that people in the program will probably realize very quickly is that you're going to become the negotiation expert to everybody around you, whether you like it or not. And so everybody's going to come to you and ask you, oh, I'm negotiating my salary with my boss, or oh, I have this conflict at work or with my family, and can you help me? Can you help give me some advice? I would suggest use those opportunities to practice, and because whether I'm dealing with a CFO from a large company or with all these other types of more grander cases, they're very, very similar when you get down to the granular level to a conflict between an employee and an employer, or a husband and a wife. This stuff is very similar at the granular level.
That is very true. And also that was really great advice. So thank you so much. And again, this is being recorded. So if anyone wants to go back and have this for the future, they are welcome to do that in case you weren't taking notes. And so here's a great question from one of our audience members. Thank you for submitting it. Hi, Cody. Thank you for sharing your experience. You mentioned that you are currently working on merger and acquisition cases. Could you talk more about it? Namely, what is your role in these processes and what did you learn during NECR that helped you in this regard? For example, which courses did you take with which professors, if that's...
Yeah, so my main focus has been, I'm working in this specific case with a I'm working directly with the owner this person actually is a highly skilled negotiator in his own right, knows the theory and practice, but is needing somebody to help serve as a sounding board, to help conduct research into the other party and understand who they are. We create, in the industry, I've noticed this actually in a talk that I was having with a pharmaceutical company the other day, and they actually create profiles, in-depth psychological profiles of their counterparts in the negotiations, and I do that as well. So that's one of the things that's one of the services that I provide, is I try to analyze the other side, understand what are their interests, what are their positions likely to be, what's their history in negotiation, how might they act in the room. And so I'll provide that type of resource to the person who I'm helping prepare for that negotiation. This specific case, it was actually not entirely clear in the beginning whether or not, at least not to me, I think you'll find in some of these types of cases, you might not receive all of the information from the client that you would want to know for certain if it's this type of case or this type of case. What type of situation are they dealing with? Especially when they're very senior in an organization, they might just say, hey, help me with this, give me this type of advice. And so the thing that made it clear to me was that it was most likely a murder case, was that that's who as I profiled the individuals that were going to be countering on the other side of the table from my client, that is what their specialization was. As I dug into their backgrounds, I found out that's almost the only type of case that they do. And they were from another major company in the same sector. And so I was actually able to see based on that research, what kind of size of deals do these people do? What, in some cases, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So that was able to help prepare the client for what kind of offer might be made. What kind of deal might they be looking to make? Because this was an initial meeting, he might not have been fully aware either of why they were meeting at this stage.
Great, thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Sure. And if not, feel free to continue to type in the QA. But here's another question for you. Do you think that the fact that you graduated from Columbia helped you wow your potential employers during job hunting? Or can you talk more about how you maybe incorporated or didn't incorporate the program?
For sure, it definitely helped. I'm certain it helped with getting the job at Harvard. In fact, in my interview, when one of the final interviews for that job, it not only helped me with the writing sample, which I mentioned before, with having that come from my thesis, it also, when I was actually interviewed, I was asked, who are the people I studied with or worked with at Columbia in the field of negotiation and conflict resolution that I learned the most from? And I was able to talk about Peter Coleman and some of these other renowned professors like Morton Deutsch. I was able to meet while I was in the program, and Beth Fisher Yoshida, who's the director of the program. I was able to learn from all of those people and share that back, and the person who I was interviewing with recognized all those names, and it helped me in the process. Yeah, so it was definitely a big launch point. It helped me also. I was able to interview with, including final round interviews with major investment banks, with consulting companies, so that I don't know if I would have ever had the opportunity to even get in the room had I not had Colombia on my resume. Maybe not, but I know that I was very easily able to get into the room. It's going to come down once you're in that final round interview, whether or not you have the concrete skills. So when you're in the program, another piece of advice is look at what those skills are specifically in the field that you want to go into, because Columbia has all sorts of resources. Like I was able to take consulting courses through Columbia Business School while I was also at SBS, and it was fantastic. So definitely recommend that.
Thanks. Yes, there are electives that we offer both in the NECR program, but you're also able to take an elective or more if you so choose outside of the program as well with approval. So that is Columbia is your oyster. So yes, if anyone else has any questions, please do not hesitate. I have another question for you, and I'm wondering, because at one point you were talking about it seemed like there were a couple different interests that you had and ways you were looking at your career. And so before you really kind of moved forward with your decision, I was wondering if, looking back on that now, if you had any advice for your former self at that time as you were sort of grappling with the different directions you could go in.
Yeah, so I think I ultimately arrived at a point where it was not ever a direct path. I thought I would go straight into the foreign service, which that job, if you apply for it, takes. I later learned, I sort of discovered this late in the game, was that the application process takes about 2 years from the point at which you take the test to the hiring date. So that actually kind of, a lot of this was just me learning through the process. So I wish I was able to share some of that information back, but I ultimately think that even though I didn't get the career that I thought I wanted, I ended up with the career that I love, that has the best aspects and none of the bad aspects of being a foreign service officer in the United States government. So I'm able to help with peace processes. I'm able to help with business negotiations. I'm able to do these things that I found out that one of the things that I always wanted in a career was to be able to work with a lot of different types of projects. So I found out that consulting is great for that, but I didn't want to work for a consultancy. A big formal consulting firm because of I will not say anything bad about them, but I like having also the ability to run my own company and run my own schedule and things like that. So that's actually the really big reason, because some people find that type of work entirely rewarding and it's exactly the right thing for them. Whereas for me, I found that even if I am burning at both ends with trying to run a company, it is at least I can control everything about that, and that's something that I value. I wish I would have taken a few more in college, a few more business courses, and a few less chemistry courses. So that would have been quite useful, because I don't need to know the molar mass of hydrogen anymore. And so for some reason, that's still stuck in my head.
Well, you also have the pride of being able to take college level chemistry classes, which is no small feat. So, and I'm not sure, my next question for you might be a non-starter, because you might not be able to share this information with us, and that's okay if not. But because you mentioned working on peace processes, I was wondering if there was an example or a case that you could share more about with us.
Yeah, there might. I have to be a little careful here. So probably not anything where I would name any names or really get into any details. I did work on the. I'm trying to think about how I could share this. I worked on a conflict. I mentioned some of the cases that I was working on. We were working on a case between the United States or within the United States on the U.S. election conflict. We saw before for months ahead of the election here in 2020, we were able to see that there was going to be a problem. There was going to be a conflict between the former president and who became the man who became this current president of the United States. And there was a potential there for explosive violent conflict. And we saw that potential months and months and months ahead. So we started preparing for how can we try to help bring, if this does go to a stage like in there was a case in the 1800s following the Tilden and there was I'm trying to think, Rutherford B. Hayes and Tilden negotiation in 1876, 1877. The United States actually had a negotiated outcome to the election. And so there was precedent for this type of thing happening, and we wanted to be there in case it was needed. Thank God it wasn't ultimately needed. But what we did was we were doing a lot of work preparing for supporting such a negotiation, should it be needed, between all the various actors that you would be imagining are in the room in that type of negotiation.
Thank you so much. I think that
Sorry.
that was expertly done. Thank you. Here's a little bit of an easier question from our audience. Hi, Cody. When you were a student in the program, did you find that most students shared similar career ambitions to yours? I am interested in pursuing a business career path. However, I think your original interest in being a diplomat is intriguing.
Yeah, so that's one of the interesting things about the program is you're going to come in with people who approach negotiation and want to use it and conflict resolution and want to use it for different things. But you all, as I was sort of alluding to with my career, I've worked in both spaces and I've found them to be exceedingly similar. Now, if you work it depends on what level of negotiation or in what type of negotiation you're working with. If you're, for example, some of the people in the program ended up going and working with places like UNICEF or the United Nations, and that sometimes is dealing more with peace building and peacekeeping rather than peacemaking, which is more the area that I came to be working in. But you'll find that with all of these people, the program is just a nice little melting pot where you can explore your interests. You can talk to all these other people who are doing interesting things. When I was in the program, there was senior diplomats from Turkey and from Israel taking courses directly with me. I was able to learn from these people throughout the whole time. And I was also able to talk to other people who were working in investment banks and who were able to give me the idea that, oh, maybe I should apply to this bank or this bank. And oh, there's this position that might be interesting because you would be training these executives in order to prepare them for their potential negotiations at this major investment bank. So it's that type of experience where you can bounce ideas off of one another and learn from one another was central to my learning in the program.
I just want to piggyback off of that a little bit because every cohort we have in the program is so different, and typically because everyone has different professional backgrounds, come from all different areas of the world as well. We kind of see that there are usually three buckets, if you will, of interest. We have some students who are really interested in like peace building and international work. Others sort of there's like the business, HR, law, government bucket, and then also community, education, kind of a hyper local bucket as well. But and Cody made this point earlier where, for instance, you might have all different types of negotiations, but there are just really core elements to negotiation. And so same with all of these buckets, you have all these different interests, but the skills that you're learning in the program speak equally to all of these realms. And then when you're learning from other people who have different interests and focuses than you do, and sometimes just different perspectives on how to approach something, that, yeah, does make such an impact in your learning both inside and outside of the classroom. And it's always really fun. Yeah, just to hear all those different perspectives and also meet people that you might not have crossed paths with. So that's a great question. Thank you. I just want to see before we wrap up here, does anyone have any other questions? I will give you time to think while I ask Cody one more. Would you be able to talk to us a little bit more about your capstone topic and what did you do? And for those of you who are just joining us today, the capstone thesis is the culminating work and project in the NECR curriculum. Students work now for several semesters on this paper and present it as well at the end of the program. So Cody would have had to go through this as well. So I'd love to hear about what you selected and a little bit more about that case.
Yeah, so as I mentioned a little bit before, I chose the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. TTIP was the name, the acronym for the negotiations between the United States and the European Union. We still actually haven't reached an agreement on a comprehensive free trade agreement between the United States and the European Union, but it was happening at that time. The United States Trade Representative was meeting with their counterpart in the EU, and they were trying to ink out an agreement that would essentially remove any type of trade barriers between the two countries, and it had the potential for really cutting a lot of costs and creating a lot of money. Now we know today that there are serious questions about how that money is distributed, whether or not there are some people who are hurt by certain types of trade negotiations. But at the time, I was focused primarily on the principal negotiators, whether it's from the president and his trade representatives or dealing with anyone around them. And so what I did was I mapped out the conflict, and I discovered that, and this idea actually came about as I was attending an event at the German consulate, which is just a few miles away from Columbia's campus in Midtown, right across the street from the United Nations. And I attended a talk there and spoke with some people, and they gave me the idea. Okay, wow, this deal is being derailed. That you would think it would be very easy to reach an agreement on. It was popular, relatively speaking, in both political parties, but as well as with the parties in government for the most part. But it was being derailed because of this other conflict that was going on, which was discovered that the United States was spying directly from our embassy, and even from our embassy in Berlin, we were spying on the communications of the German chancellor. And so this conflict blew up. It became a very big public controversy in Germany, especially, but also in other countries, where it ultimately served as the reason for the deal not actually being finalized on the trade negotiations. And so I started studying this, trying to understand what type of interventions might be possible here, where the United States could maybe build some rapport and some trust with the populace in these countries, and where they can maybe incorporate some of these interests that weren't apparently being represented and were becoming spoilers in the trade negotiations. And so I mapped out the whole conflict, and I came up with some ideas that I thought would help.
Great, thank you so much. That is, thanks for sharing those extra details as well. And also, I didn't realize that was how you came across the topic through that real life experience and those conversations. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, if there are no other questions for Cody, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Cody, for being here and sharing so much about your life and perspective with us. I know that I found it was very interesting and also useful when you're thinking about new horizons and what's next. So thank you so much. Also, thank you very much to Vicki from SPS events team. And again, a recording of this will likely be available on the NECR website early next week and also on our YouTube channel. So you can come back. You can also share it with others who might not have been able to join us today. But thank you all very much. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.